Hey guys, welcome. Tonight, we set sail across the ancient Pacific not as tourist, but as traveler of time, carried by the stars. Before we begin, get comfortable. Dim the lights around you. Let the noise of the day drift quietly into the background. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the sound of waves, soft, slow, endless, touching the shore like a lullaby that never stops. Now, open your eyes, not into the present, but into the past. You are no longer here. You have been gently woken into another time before maps, before compasses, before any borders were drawn. The world is vast, open, untouched. The sky above is filled with stars that you do not yet name, but somehow already know. Beneath your feet is a canoe carved by hand, curved by memory, strong and silent, but you are not lost. You are exactly where you are meant to be. Before roads, before borders, before nations had names or maps were drawn by hand. There was the ocean not as a distant horizon or a mystery to be feared, but as a living world, a companion, a teacher, a home. For the ancient Polynesians, the ocean wasn't a barrier that separated them from one another. It was the very path that connected their lives, their islands, their gods, and their dreams. To live near the sea was not merely to live beside it. It was to live with it, to walk with it, to speak its language. Close your eyes now. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of a small island in the middle of the Pacific, an island with palm trees, gently bending in the breeze, birds calling from the canopy, and the scent of salt carried by the wind. The ground beneath your feet is warm, and the ocean stretches endlessly in every direction. Blue and vast and ancient, this is how it was for generations. For those born in places like Samoa, Tonga, Hawaii, Rapa Nui, and the distant shores of Aotearoa, what we now call New Zealand, this sight was not frightening. It was familiar and deeply personal. The Pacific Ocean is immense, so immense that even with modern tools, satellites and airplanes, it humbles us still. It covers more area than all the land on Earth combined, and yet hundreds know. Thousands of small islands rise from its surface. Some are tall and volcanic. Others are low atolls, barely peaking above the waves. But to early navigators, each one was a destination, a resting point, a family home waiting to be found. How then did people find them? There were no compasses in their hands, no GPS satellites whispering in their ears, no lighthouses or light posts guiding their path. And yet, they found them, again and again, with confidence, with skill, and most of all, with a quiet trust. In the ocean's signs, you see, to us today, the ocean can feel like an empty place, a stretch of blue that goes on, with nothing to guide us but numbers or machines. But to a Polynesian wayfinder, the navigators who guided their voyaging canoes, it was just the opposite. The ocean was full of clues, full of meaning, full of memory. To these ancient travelers, the ocean was not flat. It had texture, mood, personality. The way the waves moved, the way the clouds gathered, the way the stars appeared at night, these were the words in a language they had learned from their ancestors, a language spoken softly by the sea itself. They didn't look for signs. They listened for them. And they didn't panic when days passed with no island in sight, because they trusted their training. Their ancestors had crossed the same waters, had told them where to look, had shown them the way, not through maps drawn in ink, but through chants, through song, through careful observation and quiet patience. This connection to the sea started early. Children born in these island communities grew up hearing the sound of the surf every day. It was the first lullaby they knew. They learned to swim before they learned to write, and they learned to listen before they learned to speak. To listen not only to their parents and elders, but to the world around them, to the clicking of crabs beneath the rocks, to the calls of seabirds returning at sunset, to the change in temperature when a wind shifts cooler air that might signal the approach of night. or distant rain, they watched the world as if it had something to say. Because it did, the ocean did. Not shout. It didn't flash bright signs or speak in thunder. Its voice was gentle, a subtle pattern in the waves, a shift in how the swell moved under the hull of a canoe, a change in the way the water lapped against the boat. The people who learned to read this language were the wayfinders. They were not only navigators, they were guardians of tradition, keepers of memory, teachers, priests, scientists, artists of motion. They knew how to track the stars at night, yes, but also how to interpret the flight of a bird disappearing toward the horizon. They could literally feel through the soles of their feet the rhythm of swells crossing beneath them and tell you which direction land lay. Even if it was still hundreds of kilometers away to them, the sea was not chaotic. It was layered with rhythm, like music, like breathing, and just like a great poem, it held meaning beneath the surface, of course. Not every day at sea was peaceful. Storms came, winds howled, waves swelled with power, but even then, there was understanding. They knew when to wait, when to sail, and when to return. The sea rewarded patience, so they were patient. A journey might take days, weeks, sometimes longer, but every mile was taken with care. The canoe did not rush. The crew did not argue. There was a rhythm to life aboard the paddling, the resting, the storytelling, the sleeping under the stars. They did not fear the endless blue. They lived in it. They prayed in it. They passed stories through it, because for them the sea was not just water. It was the highway of their ancestors, the road to the past, the bridge to the future. They believed their ancestors walked with them when they sailed, that the stars above were not just burning suns in the sky, but the eyes of those who came before, guiding them, watching over them. And so, when you stood on the shore of your island, preparing to leave, you didn't just see the sea as distance. You saw it as a path already marked, already walked, already blessed. All you had to do was trust. Before a single wave is crossed, before a single paddle touches water, something sacred begins in the forest. For the ocean-traveling people of the Pacific, every great voyage began not with sails or stars, but with trees, tall, quiet trees. Trees that had stood for many years, growing strong in silence, holding the wisdom of wind and earth in every ring of wood beneath their bark. To build a canoe waka was to make something more than a boat. It was to shape a living vessel, one that carried not just people, but prayers, memories, songs, and the hopes of an entire village. A waka was not made quickly. It wasn't made thoughtlessly. It was made with respect, with rhythm, and with heart. When a tree was chosen, it wasn't selected just for size or straightness. Elders and builders visited the forest with quiet feet and soft voices. They didn't point or rush. They listened to the wind rustling through the leaves, too. The birds perched in the canopy, to the feeling in their own chests. The right tree had to feel right. It had to call to them. And when they found it, they didn't just cut it down. They greeted it. A short chant was spoken. Sometimes a flower or piece of food was laid at its roots. The builders gave thanks for its life. They explained why they had come. They promised to treat its wood with care and honor. Only then, using hand tools made from shell or coral or stone, they began the work. The tree fell slowly. Every cut echoed in the forest's quiet. There were no chainsaws here, no loud machines, just careful hands and patient eyes. When the tree finally settled onto the forest floor, a ripple of stillness passed through the builders. They had taken something important, and now it was time to give it a second life. Right there among the other trees, the shaping began. The outer bark was stripped away, revealing the smooth wood beneath. The hollowing of the trunk wasn't rushed. Bit by bit, wood was carved away until the middle began to curve and deepen. Every inch mattered. To thin and the whole would break in waves, to thick and it would be too heavy to move. The builders worked together slowly, with soft chanting or humming to keep time. Each part of the waka had a name, not just front or back, but sacred names tied to parts of the body, head, spine, ribs. The canoe was not a tool. It was alive. When the shape of the hull had formed, it was carried or rolled on logs from the forest to the shore. This could take days, even weeks. Villagers came to help. Children ran ahead, clearing stones. Women brought food and water. Elders walked behind, singing gently to guide the way. The forest had given its gift. Now the sea would receive it. On the beach, the work continued. Cross beams were attached to support the shape. An outrigger's smaller beam or hull was fixed on the side, connected by flexible sticks and string to help keep balance in choppy water. Some waka had two main hulls sitting side by side, strong and even like twin arms carrying a load together. And then came the sail. Sails were not store-bought sheets of fabric. They were woven by hand from long strips of dry pandanus leaf. Each strip was rolled, dried, flattened, and then carefully joined to another. The weave had to be strong but also light. Wind needed to fill the sail like a breath fills lungs. If it was too heavy, it would sag. Too loose, and it would tear. Weaving took weeks. Only skilled hands could do it well. The finished sail was shaped like a crab's claw, able to shift to catch the wind from different directions. The ropes that held the whole canoe together were made from coconut husk fiber, not just tied once or twice, but wound, layered, and tightened. Again, these ropes held the waka strong across waves and storms, and still no nails, no metal. Just wood, rope, leaf, and love. Decoration came last. Some canoes had carvings, faces of spirits, curling lines of wind or waves, shapes of turtles, birds, or gods. These designs weren't just pretty. They told stories. They reminded the crew of where they came from, who protected them, and where they hoped to go. Sometimes the entire front of the waka was carved into a fierce face or a wide mouth, not to scare enemies but to keep the canoe safe. Finally, the day arrived. The waka was complete. Not done hastily, not made from instruction books, but born from memory. Raised by hand, blessed in spirit. Before it touched the sea, there was a ceremony. Villagers gathered. The builder, or a spiritual elder, spoke softly to the canoe, offering thanks and asking it to carry its people kindly. A flower might be tucked into its bow. A few drops of coconut water might be sprinkled inside. A chant was sung, a small offering like. A shell or fruit was placed in the water nearby, a gift to the sea gods. Then, with many hands and quiet hearts, the canoe was pulled into the shallow waves. It rocked gently, testing its new body. The water accepted it. The sea rose and fell around it. It floated, and just like that, it was ready, not just a boat, a companion, a protector, a path. They gave it a name, and from that moment on, it was alive. The sea was waiting. After weeks, even months of careful building, shaping, carving, and chanting, the moment had come. The waka sat in the shallow surf, rocking gently like a cradle. Its wooden frame gleamed from the oil rubbed into its sides. Its woven sail hung above, catching the breeze like a sleepy breath. The ropes were strong. The lashings were tight. The people were ready. But no one rushed for the Polynesian voyager. Setting out across the ocean wasn't just a journey from one island to another. It was a conversation between the human world and something much older. The sea didn't belong to anyone, but it welcomed those who moved with respect. The canoe was more than a vehicle. It was a floating community, a small piece of land made to move across water. Every part of life had to fit into its long, narrow frame: food, water, tools, weapons, spare rope, gifts, stories, hopes, silence, and song. There was no room for clutter, either in the canoe or in the mind. The whacker sailed best when everyone worked as one dot in the morning. The crew loaded food and fresh water. They packed taro root wrapped in leaves, bunches of bananas still green and firm, dried strips of fish, coconuts that held both food and drink. They carried bundles of firewood wrapped tightly in topper cloth to keep them dry. There were flint, stones to spark fire if needed, hooks for fishing, and small gourds filled with oil, salt, or healing herbs. Each person had their task. Some tied the sails and checked the ropes. Others sorted supplies or cleared sand from the hull. The older ones offered soft chants, calling on the ancestors and ocean spirits for good passage. Children might bring flowers or shells to place gently at the front of the canoe, a gift to the waves, and a wayfinder. They stood still. They watched, they listened. Their eyes traced the shape of the waves, the tilt of the clouds, the birds circling above. While others moved, the wayfinder remained calm. They did not carry a map. They did not carry a compass. All the directions they needed were already inside them. As the tide rose, lifting the canoe softly from the shore, the journey began. At first, the island behind them still looked large, safe, familiar. Palms lined the beaches and smoke from the cooking fires could still be seen curling above the trees. Laughter echoed faintly over the water. But slowly the island became smaller. Then it became a shape. Then it became a line. Then it was gone, and ahead endless blue. But to the wayfinder, it was not empty. No part of the ocean was ever empty. Every part of the sea had something to say if you knew how to listen. The water was full of clues. The way waves bounced off unseen reefs. The way currents tugged gently in one direction. The smell of the air, the coolness of the breeze, the thin white birds that only flew near land. Even the way the sun sat in the sky at noon could speak. At night, when the wind was quiet and the stars filled the sky, the sea became a mirror. The whacker glided across it like a thought, smooth and slow. There was no engine, no anchor, no glowing screens. There was only wood, water, wind, and trust. The crew moved in silence. They adjusted the sail when needed. They checked the supplies. They laid flat on the floorboards and let the waves lull them to sleep. And one person always stayed, awake, the wayfinder. They sat cross-legged, eyes open to the stars, back straight, heart steady. They watched how the stars rose along the edge of the ocean. They knew each star's name, where it would appear, how far it would climb before it faded into the west. Every hour, they gently adjusted the direction of the canoe, keeping it along the right path. Sometimes they spoke softly to themselves, not in fear, not in doubt, but in rhythm. The stars had their own story, and so did the swells. Every ocean swell moved in a long, rolling rhythm, and the wayfinder, without needing to see it, could feel the direction it came from, just by the gentle push beneath the canoe. They remembered these swells like others remember streets or signs. This one comes from the east, they would whisper. That one rides beneath from the south. But the third, yes, the third swell is from home. Follow it. Each voyage was long. Sometimes it took 5 days, sometimes 20. But the whacker was prepared, and so were the people. When storms came, the crew didn't panic. They lowered the sail. They tied themselves to the canoe with coconut rope. They sang, not loud songs but low, steady ones. Songs that reminded them of home, that kept time with the paddling, that carried them through until the sky cleared. Again, when the wind died and the sea was flat, they waited, they fished, they cleaned their hands in the cool water. They spoke stories from their grandparents, or sometimes they said nothing at all and let the silence tell its own tale. During the days, the sun was hot, the sky was wide. They used coconut leaves to shade their faces. They passed around gourds of water and wiped the sweat from their foreheads. But always the whacker moved forward. Each crew member had a role, but no one was above anyone else. All were equal in the eyes of the sea. Even the wayfinder spoke gently, never shouting, never demanding. They simply guided. When birds appeared, flying in loops or landing on the water, the wayfinder smiled. Land was near when the clouds began to stack like towers and the water changed color, becoming greener or filled with little bits of floating leaves. The crew sat up straighter. Land was near when the smell in the air changed, becoming sweeter, thicker, full of soil and trees and flowers. The people began to hum. Land was near. And when, at last, a thin line rose on the edge of the sea, they shouted with joy, not loudly, but with warmth. A pulse of happiness ran through the canoe. They had done it. They had crossed the space between seen and unseen. They had trusted the sea, and the sea had carried them forward. The new island was not home, not yet, but it welcomed them. It offered fresh water, coconut trees, birds singing in the canopy, perhaps other people, perhaps silence. But either way, the whacker had brought them here safely. And one day, perhaps, it would carry them again, because the whacker is not just a canoe. It is a memory that floats. It is a whisper of wind and a steady line drawn across the ocean. It is a heart, made of wood, tied together with fiber and song. It is home, even while moving away from home, and it always listens to the sea. When night comes to the open sea, it does not come suddenly, but arrives gently, like a soft breath drawn over the sky. First, the edges of the clouds turn golden, then silver, then blue. Birds begin to head home. The sea quiets, its surface smoothing out like a great sheet of silk. As the sun dips below the horizon, a hush falls upon the canoe. The horizon grows soft, shadows stretch, and then, above slowly, patiently, the stars come out, one by one at first, like shy children peeking out from behind a curtain, then more and more, until the sky is full, completely alive with starlight. To the ancient wayfinders of the Pacific, this was not just beautiful, this was information, this was memory, this was the map they had carried not in their hands but in their hearts. Modern people might look up and see random stars scattered in all directions, but to a Polynesian navigator, the sky was ordered, layered, full of parts. The stars were organized into bands and belts. They rose and fell in patterns as steady as the tide. Each star had a place, each had a purpose, each had something to say. But to understand the sky as a map, you had to start with the most important line, the horizon. Wayfinders imagined the horizon as a circle drawn all around the canoe. Imagine standing in the center of a big, round bowl, with the sky curving above, and the sea stretching to every edge. North sat in front, south was behind, east to the right, west to the left. This circle had points kind of like a compass, but not made of metal. It was made of memory, made of stars. This invisible circle is called the star compass. The star compass is not something carved into the canoe. It's not drawn on paper. It exists in the mind of the navigator, and in that circle called Tilopo, Kapehu Wetu, or similar words depending on the island language, there are dozens of points where the stars rise and set. Wayfinders memorized these points. They knew exactly where each important star would come up over the edge of the sea, not just somewhere east, but exactly which notch of the horizon the star would appear in, and where it would fall back down again hours later. They learned these positions by watching the sky, night after night, year after year, from the time they were young, lying on their backs in their canoes, listening to their elders, watching, remembering. Some stars were used when traveling north, some guided trips to the west, Others only showed up in certain seasons, but they were always dependable, like friendly faces returning year after year. Here's how it worked. As the canoe moved across the ocean, the wayfinder would watch the sky. If they wanted to go in a certain direction, let's say southeast, they would pick a star that rose in that direction. They would keep the canoe pointed at that star as it rose into the sky. Even as it climbed higher, the wayfinder would remember where it had first appeared on the horizon. That was their line. When the star eventually moved too far up or disappeared, the wayfinder would choose another star that rose in the same direction and continue. They did this over and over again, switching stars along the same path, keeping their course true even as the sky changed. But they didn't just memorize individual stars. They memorized entire star path strings of stars that rose in order one after another, along the same line in the sky. These paths were like glowing roads above the canoe, pointing the way across the ocean. Each star path had a name. Each star had a place in a story. It was not dry information. It was living memory. Wayfinders would chant the stars aloud in order, like singing an old song. This kept them focused. It helped the crew stay calm. It made the voyage feel connected not just to the stars, but to every generation that had sailed under them. Now picture it. You're lying on the deck of a whacker, the canoe rocking gently under your back. It's dark, but not scary. The stars above are bright and steady. The waves hush softly beside you, and the sky is alive with memory. The navigator is awake. Their eyes are open. They are not just looking at stars. They are listening to what the sky has to say. They see Hercule, a bright star that rises in the east during certain months, guiding sailors back to Hawaii. They see Altair, rising just above the bow, pointing the way southeast. They see Antares, sitting low in the sky like a red eye, steady and calm, marking another trusted path. Each star is familiar. Each star reminds them of home, of elders, of the chants they learned as children. The navigator does not need to speak. Their body knows which way they're facing. Their memory holds the line. And the sky so wide, so open, has become a friend. During the night, the stars rotate slowly overhead, just like the sun does during the day. But instead of blazing, the stars shimmer quietly, and the navigator watches how they shift, how they drift from one part of the circle to another. They feel the movement. They stay awake all night, or wake in shifts to keep track, because even the smallest mistake, a shift of just a few degrees, could send the canoe far off course. Over days of travel. But they do not panic. They trust the sky. They trust themselves. And they trust the stories that hold the stars in place. Because this knowledge wasn't written down in books. It was passed hand to hand, voice to ear, star to soul. Young boys and girls learned by watching, by repeating the chants, by sailing short trips, by asking questions. Their elders didn't lecture. They showed. They told stories. They built memory through rhythm and repetition. The sky was their classroom. The ocean was their teacher. And the stars were their map. Even cloudy nights didn't cause fear. Navigators knew how to track the movement of their canoe even when the stars were hidden, by remembering how long a star had been rising before it disappeared, by feeling the direction of the swell, by sensing the wind's weight and smell. They had backup plans. They had stories for every weather. They had trust in their training. And when the clouds lifted and the stars returned, it was like old friends stepping through the door, each one waiting where it was supposed to be. Shining. Watching. Guiding. And just maybe speaking in a voice only the wayfinder could hear. The stars were never just above the canoe. They were around it, beneath it, within it. To Polynesian navigators, sailing under an open sky was not a mystery. It was a reunion, a quiet joining of one world with another, a world of water and wind. beneath and a world of light and memory above. The center of this connection was something no one could see with their eyes, but every wayfinder could feel with their heart. It was called the star compass now. If you were standing on a canoe in the middle of the ocean, you might look out and see nothing but endless water stretching to every side. But if you had grown up learning the sea, listening to your teachers, and watching the stars every night since childhood, you would know that the world around you wasn't empty at all. You would see it as a circle drawn not with ink, but with memory. This circle was the horizon everywhere you looked. The edge of the sea wrapped around you like a great round belt, and that edge the line where sea-touched sky held more secrets than any map ever drawn. Wayfinders divided this circle into many parts, not just for simple directions like north, south, east, and west, but more than 32 different points, each one marking where a star would rise or set. Imagine a great wheel all around you. In front of you is the rising sun east. Behind you is the setting sun west. To your right hand is the south. To your left hand is the north. But now imagine there are names for the points between these. Not just northeast or southwest, but much finer names that differ slightly from island to island, but always serve the same purpose, to divide the sky into reliable places. Each wedge of this circle tells the navigator something, and each star they know rises at a specific wedge. So, when a navigator sees a familiar star just popping up over the edge of the sea, let's say at a point called Manu or Cow, or Log, depending on tradition, they know their direction perfectly. That star is a signpost. Its light is a line across the sea. They keep the bow of the canoe pointed right at it and follow it. Then, hours later, when the star has drifted high overhead and down toward the other side of the sky, it sets in the opposite wedge. The navigator remembers both points where the star rose and where it will fall. This is not done with instruments. There is no measuring stick, no sextant, no metal compass. It is done with memory, with rhythm, with long hours watching and listening, under open skies. Now think of this. There are hundreds of stars in the night sky, but the wayfinder focuses on only certain ones, bright ones, reliable ones, stars that stay on track night after night, year after year. These stars form the wayfinder's personal compass. Some stars rise close together, forming star houses, places where families of stars appear, one after the other. Some stars are known as steering stars. They are particularly bright or important, used for long voyages. A navigator might follow one steering star for hours, then switch to another as the first climbs to height or disappears into the dawn. They never panic when a star fades. They simply shift to the next star in the path because they know the line. They know the path of light through the sky. This path is learned over many years, not by reading books, but by laying down, watching, noticing, memorizing. Some communities build simple stone or stick tools to teach young learners. They point toward where the stars rise. They say, "This is the place of Rahua. This is where Hercule is born. This is the home of Tikaha." But most of the time, it's not about the tools. It's about stories. Each star belongs to a story. That story tells when the star arrives, what it means, what time of year it lives in the sky. Sometimes the stars are named after birds or canoes, or beloved ancestors. Sometimes they are eyes or tears or spears. Sometimes they are lovers who chase each other from one side of the night to the other. Why? Because stories stick. A chant about stars lasts longer than numbers. A song passed from grandparent to grandchild lives longer than paper. These chants list the stars in order where they rise, what direction they point, and which island lies beneath their path. So a navigator might sing softly as the canoe moves. When Te Waka rises, Sail to the east. When Motoriki shines, turn to the south. When the shark's tooth dances, the land is near. These are not just poems. They are instructions. They are navigation guides hidden inside lullabies. And so, the wayfinder remembers not just names, but positions, relationships, timing. They know how long each star takes to rise and fall. They know how far the canoe will drift in those hours. They can guess when morning will arrive just by the position of one star in the sky. They don't just follow the stars, they live with them, and while the canoe sleeps, the stars whisper their directions across the waves. Now picture this, you are on the ocean. The night is soft, no moon tonight, only stars. The sky above you is scattered with light, but to the wayfinder, it isn't random, it's a full circle of directions. It's a compass you're floating inside. You see 3 stars rising in a line. The wayfinder names them quietly. That's the spine of the canoe, they say. Follow that path until sunrise. Later, one star flashes a bit lower, and the waves under the hull feel different. The navigator notes the change in rhythm. We've drifted, they whisper. Correct. One house to the left. Follow Tortoru now. And just like that, the direction adjusts. No panic. No discussion. Just memory. And trust. This is the gift of the star compass. It doesn't change. It doesn't break. It lives in the navigator. And it turns even the widest, darkest sea into a known, walkable path. This invisible compass has carried people for generations, long before European explorers arrived with maps and watches, long before satellites, long before cities drowned out the stars with lights, and even now, in the quiet places on canoes rebuilt in traditional ways, carrying grandchildren and great-grandchildren, it still works, because the sky still remembers, and so do the people. Night has always had a way of making us look up. When the world grows quiet, and the sea turns dark, and the breath of the earth softens to a whisper, our eyes rise toward the shimmer of stars, toward the map of light drawn across the heavens. For the people of the Pacific, looking up at the stars wasn't just a way to find direction. It was a way to feel at home, to feel connected, to feel loved by something much older than time, because they believed softly, deeply, with quiet certainty that the stars were not just light, they were family, they were ancestors, they were memory, they were spirit, and like elders seated in the sky, they watched over the people who moved across the ocean below. It was said that when someone died, someone who had lived well, sailed far, remembered chance, and walked with care, their soul didn't vanish, it rose, it became a star. Not all stars, of course, held ancestors. Some were guiding lights, some were messengers, some were homes for the gods. But certain stars you spoke to, you whispered to them on clear nights. You greeted them when they appeared on the horizon. You followed them not just because they knew the way, but because they were the ones who helped you get there. Many islands had star names tied directly to people. A grandparent, a master canoe builder, a beloved teacher. When that star rose, the navigator smiled. It meant they were near. The line between the living and the remembered was soft, gentle, like dawn. It wasn't just about navigation, it was about connection. And it was through song that these connections stayed alive. Stories held the stars. Songs carried them. Chants planted them deep in the heart. A boy didn't learn the sky by staring at a diagram. He learned it sitting on his grandmother's lap. He learned it listening to his uncle while laying on a canoe under a sky so full of stars it looked like woven cloth. He learned it by singing not loudly but steadily. Star names strung together like beads. Each chant had rhythm, each verse had movement. The words aligned with the pace of waves or the timing of all strokes. Some songs were sung while paddling, some while falling asleep. some only during ceremonies when a voyage began. They were practical, they were poetic, they were memory-wrapped. In music, here's how a chant might work. It would begin with the name of a star rising from the east, then another, each one marking a point on the invisible compass. The chant would then tell how to shift direction when that star disappeared. It would remind the navigator to listen to the waves, to smell the air, to watch the birds. And all of this, every instruction, every clue was carried in melody. This made it easier to remember. But more importantly, it made it sacred. Because music is emotion. It carries feeling better than words alone. And when the navigator sang softly in the dark, they weren't just remembering, they were being remembered. They were stepping into a story much older than themselves. A story where every canoe was a verse, every voyage a line in the poem, every return home the final note of a long-held song. And in the space between starlight and breath, something beautiful happened. The canoe became part of the sky. Not literally, of course. It floated still on water. Its ropes were still made of coconut fiber. Its hull still carved from trees. But in the hearts of those aboard, the separation between sea and sky faded. They belonged to both. They were sailing within the embrace of their ancestors. They were remembering and being remembered. They were home no matter how far from land. These songs were never written down in books. If you asked a wayfinder where, the chants were recorded, they would smile and tap their chest. Here, they'd say. And here, they tapped their head necks. These songs lived in the bones. They were passed along by speaking, by singing, by repeating. Often they were shared during the evenings after a meal. Elders would gather children around, point to the sky and begin the chant. Do you see that star? They would ask. Double quotes, yes, the child would say. That's Te Mora Ohine. She rises in the time of cool winds. She brings the fish close. Follow her path, and you will return with full nets. Another night, a different story. That one is Matayariki. He guards the southern edge of the path. When he sets, rest. When he rises again, sail, and over time, through listening and repeating, the children became the holders of the sky. One day, they would sail too. They would whisper to the stars in their own voice. They would teach the next. Once, the stars did not change, but the hands that pointed to them did. Each generation left their song a little stronger. Each voyage deepened the melody. Each clear night was a gift, a chance to look up, feel small and yet completely seen. Because above every whacker, above every wave, above every sigh of the ocean, the stars burned quietly. They did not shout. They simply shone. Watching. Waiting. Remembering. And in those quiet hours, when sleep touched the eyes of the crew, when only one ought to remain awake beneath the sky's great breath, the songs of the ancestors would wrap around them like a blanket. Not because they were alone, but because they were surrounded. By memory. By direction. By love. By stars. When most people look out at the open ocean, they see one thing: water. Blue, endless. Beautiful perhaps, but mostly the same in every direction. But for a wayfinder, someone trained to sail across the Pacific with no compass, no maps, and no written tools, the sea is not all the same. The ocean is not flat, and it is not silent, not with words, of course. The sea speaks with movement, with patterns, with rhythm, and if you learn to listen, like generations of Polynesian navigators did, you begin to understand that the ocean is full of signals, messages, and direction, all told by waves. This part of the story begins not in the sky, but in the sea itself, long before GPS or metal instruments. Wayfinders knew that they could find their way not just by watching the stars, but also by feeling the waves, and not just the big ones we see during a storm, but the gentle swells that roll across the ocean every day. These swells are slow, calm. They move in long, smooth lines. If you stood in a canoe in the middle of the ocean and closed your eyes, you would feel the canoe rising, then lowering, rising, lowering. Sometimes from the front, sometimes from the side, sometimes from a strange angle that makes your feet shift just a little to stay balanced. To the ordinary traveler, these movements might seem random, but to a wayfinder they are directions written by the sea itself. Let's slow down and look at where these waves come from. Some begin with wind. Far away, maybe hundreds or even thousands of kilometers off, winds blow across the surface of the ocean. These winds push water. That movement becomes a wave. And those waves don't just stop when the wind stops. They keep moving. Long after the storm has ended, the swell keeps going, traveling peacefully for days. By the time the swell reaches the canoe, it may feel like nothing more than a gentle rise and fall, but a wayfinder knows where it came from just by how it feels under their feet. Imagine that. They could tell which direction wind was blowing from hundreds of kilometers away, just by sensing a soft rhythm beneath them. And it doesn't end there. Sometimes there is more than one swell. Maybe one comes from the northeast, another comes from the southeast. One is soft, the other more forceful. They cross each other. They crisscross beneath the canoe. This creates patterns that repeat. To a trained navigator, the canoe tells you everything. If it rocks side to side, a swell is hitting it from the left or right. If it rises in front and lowers at the back, the swell is coming head-on. If the pattern is long and soft, the swell is from far away. If it's short and choppy, it's from nearby wind. By sleeping on the canoe, lying down flat, or standing with their knees slightly bent, a navigator could feel all these details with their body. They didn't need to open their eyes. They listened with their skin. With their feet, with the shifting of their balance. This is the sea's quiet language, and like any language, it must be learned slowly. Children on the islands grew up near the shore. They played in the shallows. They listened to the wave sounds while falling asleep. They learned to paddle early. They watched as canoes rose on some waves and were pushed by others. Their teachers didn't hold a textbook. Instead, they pointed and said, "Do you feel that? That's a swell from the southeast. It's soft and long. It's been traveling for many days." They would wait. Then they would say, "Now feel that? A new swell is coming from the west. It's from a wind that started not far from here." The child would nod and remember. These lessons continued for years. Until that child, now grown, could step into a canoe in open sea, close their eyes, and tell where the land was, even if it couldn't be seen yet. Because land changes waves. Islands reflect them, stop them, shape them. Waves that hit an island bounce back. These returning swells are like echoes. They can't be seen, but they can be felt. A sharp wave from the front might be the original swell. A second, slightly off wave could be its echo. A good navigator knows the difference. In the past, some called this reading the sea with the skin. That's exactly what it is. The sea also changes its texture based on these waves. On calm days, the surface looks like glass, broken only by swells that move like breath. On windy days, little peaks form white caps, but underneath the chaos, the larger swells remain. They are slow, deep, steady. If you know how to ignore the surface chatter, you can find the longer, deeper voice below. Wayfinders focused on this deep voice. They did not get distracted by temporary winds. They listened to the steady swell beneath. Some wayfinders trained by floating in canoes with their eyes covered. No stars, no landmarks, nothing but the feel of the water beneath them. They would lay on the floor of the canoe. They would wait. They would feel the front rise, then the back, or maybe the left side tip just slightly. That was enough. they would adjust the direction of the canoe by a little, then wait again. Over time, they would sail for hundreds of kilometers across open sea, never seeing land, never seeing a star, and yet arrive at their exact destination. All because they listened to the waves. All because they knew the sea was not one voice but many. Like a choir singing in rounds, the swells come in layers. One from the east, one from the south, one small, one wide, one near, one far, and the canoe floats. Within their conversation, there is also another layer of this skill, one filled with wonder. Some wayfinders speak of a glowing line beneath the surface of the water, a beam of energy that flows between islands. It cannot be seen with the eye. It can be felt only by someone in tune with the waves. They call it T-Lop of the lightning path. It's like a quiet current of light and motion that connects island to island. Wayfinders say it pulses under the water when land is near. Some say it can only be felt. Others say it flickers like a flash of light just under the sea. Science may struggle to explain it, but the wayfinders didn't need science. They trusted their senses. They trusted the ocean. They knew that the water always remembers where it has been and where it is going. This part of the journey doesn't end with a star overhead. It ends with the knowledge that no matter what the sky shows, even on cloudy nights, even during storms, even if the stars vanish, the sea still speaks, even in the dark, even when you cannot see. As long as you can feel, you can still find your way. Because the ocean doesn't forget. Its waves carry stories written by wind and island and moon. And if you learn its rhythm, if you slow down and truly listen, those stories will guide you. Every soft rise beneath your feet is a direction. Every gentle tilt is a word. And every hour of listening is a step forward toward land, toward understanding, and always, always toward home. Long before the island rises on the horizon, long before the birds begin their circles, long before the color of the water changes, or the clouds start to build like towers, the sea already knows. It whispers in the waves, carries a soft message across its surface, not in a shout, but in a shifting pattern, a touch of tension, a quiet reply. And for the one who listens, the wayfinder at the center of the canoe, that whisper becomes a voice that says, land is near. This final part of our journey through the ocean's language takes us to a subtle place, one filled not with obvious signs, but with clues that drift like the scent of flowers on a breeze. We're going to step into the minds of those who learn to read these clues, to feel the difference between one swell and another, to notice when the pattern underfoot becomes layered, or tangled, or new. Because where swells meet, there are stories. Where rhythms change, there is meaning. Where silence breaks into pattern, there is land. We begin with the meeting of swells. Imagine two long, gentle swells moving across the ocean. One comes from the southeast, steady, slow, breathed out by a storm that passed many days ago. The other, from the west, perhaps started by trade winds blowing softly for hours. Each swell moves peacefully, unaware of the other. But as they cross paths, something beautiful happens. They meet, they mix, they form a network of movement that isn't random, but woven. Where before there was one rhythm, now there are two. You feel it beneath your feet on the canoe, a gentle roll from the front, a subtle push from the side, a shift in how you keep your balance. This is not confusion, it is a message, because some of these crossing swells aren't just from the wind, they're from islands. Yes, land changes the sea. Islands reflect waves. When a swell hits an island's shore, especially rocky coasts or coral reefs, it doesn't simply vanish, it bounces back. That bounce travels across the ocean again like an echo. It's softer, weaker, more tired, but it carries direction. Imagine tossing a stone into a pond. The ripples spread outward in circles. Now place a small rock in the water. The ripples hit it, and some bounce back toward you. If you watch carefully, you'll see where they return from. You'll know something's there even if you can't yet see it. Now apply that to the vast Pacific. The wayfinder, even miles away from land, can feel those returning ripples. They don't look like waves. They're more like a pulse in the ocean's rhythm, a hesitation, a second beat layered under the first. They notice a swelling that's slightly off time. They stop. They sit. They feel, this wave isn't alone. They whisper, and they smile, because they know something is nearby. Waves also bend. This is called refraction, a change in the wave's path caused by underwater shapes, like reefs, or by shallow sea near a coastline. When a long wave approaches an island, the part of the wave that hits shallow water slows down. The rest keeps moving. This bends the wave. A wayfinder watching carefully will see that curve. They'll notice one side of the canoe rising earlier than the other. They might hear a ripple change. They may not see the island yet, but they already know they've reached its edge. Even underwater mountains called seamounts can disturb wave paths. A navigator sensing a strange tension beneath the canoe may say, "We're sailing over something. It may not be land above sea level, but it's part of the island's extended body. It's the first sign that they're entering a new world." Currents also speak. A current isn't a wave. It's a steady flow of water that moves across great distances. Some are fast, some are wide, some change with the seasons. Wayfinders know how to feel them, not because they can see the water moving, but because the canoe behaves differently when the current catches it. If the canoe begins to drift sideways ever so slowly, they notice. If the swell beneath them used to come straight and now arrives at an angle, they adjust. They drop a small stick or leaf into the water and watch how it floats. Does it move faster than the canoe? Does it spin? Does it sit still? This is ancient observation. Simple but sharp. Currents speak of what's ahead. Sometimes warm water means an island near the equator. Cool currents might bring nutrients and seabirds. A mix of warm and cold water may cause mist or change the fish that gather. All of it tells a story, and the navigator reads it without needing to be told. Clouds also hint. Land changes air, just like it changes waves. Islands give off heat during the day. This heat rises, carrying moisture from trees, soil, and even animals. That rising warmth creates clouds especially tall, puffy ones that seem to stand still on the horizon. Wayfinders look for those clouds. They may not see the island, but they see a steady column of white mist in the distance. They say, "The island wears a hat today," and they steer toward it. If they're not sure, they wait until sunset, because sunsets hold truth. At sunset, if the sea seems to darken too quickly in one place, if the light fades faster behind a certain point, then there may be a mountain blocking the sun. No island can hide from the wayfinder forever. Its signature always escapes. In waves. In wind. In light. In sound. Yes, even sound changes. When land is near, the sea makes different noises. Water hits rocks. It whispers along sand. Birds cry out, even far offshore. Fish rise toward coral reefs. The navigator listens late at night, lying flat on the wood, eyes closed. They hear the ocean's voice shift. They feel the canoe tighten under them. The water changes tone. Something is different. Something is close, and still they wait, because land must arrive slowly, like dawn. Then, the first true sign, a bird. A white bird, perhaps, with wide wings and calm eyes. It circles once, twice. Then it flies in a straight line toward the horizon. The navigator watches. If the bird disappears, then turns back toward the canoe. It's a seabird at play. But if it flies straight and never returns, then it sleeps on land, and the navigator knows where to go. Later, another bird joins it. To messengers. and the sea grows louder. The wind starts to carry smell sweet, green, earthy. Another swell reflects from beneath. Another shifting cloud cover. And finally, a thin dark line rises from the water's edge. Land. Long awaited. But never a surprise, because the sea told its secret hours ago. The navigator simply listened. So, what do we learn from this? That the sea is never empty. Even before land appears, it speaks. Waves echo. Currents tug. Clouds form. Birds point. The water changes its rhythm like a song, adding a new verse. And the wayfinder calm, observant, thankful sails not by luck, but by faith in that rhythm. This, more than anything, is the art of ancient ocean travel. It's the joining of sky and sea. Of hand and paddle. Of swell and soul. Because the sea, when listened to carefully, always points the way home. The sea is wide, the sky above it even wider. But among the many things that helped ancient wayfinders find land, perhaps none were as alive and graceful as the birds. Polynesian navigators didn't look at birds simply as part of nature. They saw them as messengers, signals of direction, companions, sometimes even spiritual guides. When land was still far away beyond what the eye could see, the birds often revealed the truth. Certain seabirds live their whole lives far out at sea. They sleep on the water, glide on ocean breezes, and follow fish over long distances. But others always return to land. They feed during the day, but nest on shore each night. These were the birds navigators paid close attention to. Take the noddy, tern, or the frigate bird, for example. These birds usually don't travel more than 30 to 50 kilometers from land. If you saw one flying low in the evening, making a steady line across the sky, you could be almost certain it was heading home. And if more than one bird was flying that way, it was like a soft-spoken arrow pointing the way. Navigators watched them closely. They watched how they flew high or low, straight or looping. They watched what time they appeared, early morning or late afternoon. They listened to their calls. A returning bird often meant land lay ahead. An outbound bird seen at dawn meant land was behind. But it wasn't just individual birds. Whole flocks could tell a story. Sometimes birds would spiral high in the sky, circling a spot over the ocean. This might be where fish were feeding valuable information for the canoe crew. Other times, the birds would scatter suddenly. That often meant a bigger predator like dolphins or tuna was passing below. Wayfinders also learned to recognize the personality of different bird species. Some were loud and eager, always the first to appear. Others stayed quiet, hidden, waiting for certain conditions. And certain birds arrived just before landfall, as if leading the canoe safely to shore. Beyond their physical presence, birds were part of the navigator's spiritual world. Some believed certain birds carried the spirits of ancestors. Others believed a bird appearing unexpectedly meant that a loved one was watching over the journey. Even today, in some parts of the Pacific, elders speak of birds with respect, not just for their beauty, but for their wisdom. To navigate by birds was to trust more than sight. It was to listen, to feel, and to believe that life around you is connected, that even wings above the waves can show the way. The sea has always hidden its roads well. No paint marks the lanes. No signs hang in the waves. No border posts rise between islands. The ocean is a vast, ever-changing skin, soft in some places, rough in others, and always in motion. And yet, long before ink met paper, before maps were folded into backpacks or tucked into boat drawers, the people of the Marshall Islands created maps that could be held, touched, and felt, not for decoration but for memory, not for framing but for learning. They were called stick charts, and they were maps of the sea written not in lines and labels, but in curved branches, tied shells, and woven understanding. Let's take our time to explore this quiet brilliance because, like the sea itself, it's easy to miss unless we slow down. The Marshall Islands sit quietly in the vast Pacific Ocean, northeast of Papua New Guinea. They are a scattering of low-lying coral atolls and tiny islands, grouped in long chains Ratak Sunrise and Ralik Sunset, spread across thousands of kilometers of ocean. These islands may seem isolated to the modern eye, but to their people, the sea that stretched between them was never empty. It was a path, a living map. And so they made maps that captured not where the islands sat exactly, but how the ocean behaved between them. That's a subtle difference most modern maps are about. Location, this is here, that is there. But stick charts are about motion. They show how the waves move between places. They show how the ocean dances with land. They show the rhythms of current and swell not as you see them from the sky, but as you feel them in the belly of a canoe. Each chart was handmade. No two were the same. There were no rulers, no standard measurements. Only hands, memory, and experience. Thin strips of cocoa or coconut midrib formed the structure. These flexible yet strong rods were tied together using plant fiber. Where the sticks crossed, they might represent an island, or the meeting point of swells. Sometimes small cowrie shells or seed pods were tied in at key points. These often marked actual islands or anchor features in the water. But the genius of the chart was not in what it looked like, it was in what it carried. Let's walk through what these curved sticks meant. Some represented the direction of ocean swells, those deep, slow waves that travel long distances across the sea. Others showed where swells bent around islands like wind around a rock, or where they reflected and overlapped. These interactions, invisible to the eye, could be felt on a canoe. The navigator would learn how these wave shapes change during a journey. For example, in one spot, the swell might become choppy due to an underwater reef. In another, the double wave rhythm might appear, meaning you were between two islands. And feeling the echo of each elsewhere, the sea might become suddenly flat, sheltered by land ahead, even if you couldn't see it yet. The stick chart showed these feelings not in words, but in layout. It was like a visual memory of the ocean's body. Some charts were large and open, with long bent sticks showing wide swells across distances. These were sometimes used for teaching or for remembering difficult crossings. Others were small and tightly woven, fitting into a lapband used to guide short trips between nearby islands. There were even personal charts made just for one navigator, because every navigator had their own relationship with the sea. Their own story, their own rhythm, and their own way of understanding the swell. Stick charts came in different styles. Scholars later gave them categories, but the people who made them simply called them by local names. Let's look at a few types. 1. Rebelib. This was often the largest style. It showed many islands over a wide area, sometimes an entire island chain. The Rebelib included actual island positions, connections between them, and major swell patterns across long distances. These weren't carried on canoes, they were usually studied on land. Think of them like the map wall of a sea school, passed down between generations. The Rebelib helped young navigators learn where places were, how ocean patterns shifted in different parts of the chain, and what to expect as they ventured farther from home. This chart was more abstract and used mostly for teaching how waves behave around a single island. Imagine this: you place a rock in a stream and the water flows around it. On one side the water bends, on the other it curves back, swirls form, shadows dance. That's what the Matang shows, but with ocean swells instead of water. It uses curved sticks to show the main swell, and others to show reflected swells, echoes of the first wave bouncing back from land. A navigator learning with a Matang would use it like a simulator. If the swell hits this side of the island, where will the echo go? If we feel this pattern beneath the canoe, where must we be? It wasn't about memorizing. It was about building sensitivity, feeling the sea before you ever left the shore. 3. Meadow was the most practical kind of chart. It showed actual voyages' routes between specific islands with the swell patterns, crossings, and landmarks a navigator would experience along the way. It wasn't a chart you looked at casually. It was a story you lived through. Elders would sit with younger sailors and trace the lines. Here, you'll feel the wind die down. Here, the waves cross over each other. Here is the silent stretch, don't be fooled. Land echoes begin softly. Here is where the birds return. It wasn't only about finding land. It was about knowing how the sea feels between land. And that made all the difference. Now, an important note, these stick charts weren't taken on voyages. They were studied ahead of time. Memorized. Embedded into the hands and minds of navigators through gentle repetition. A young learner might sit beside their teacher every evening, tracing the curves of the chart with their fingers. They would chant the journey aloud, naming the parts of the sea they would cross, the sensations they would feel. They didn't memorize names, they memorized movement. When the student closed their eyes, they didn't see lines. They felt the canoe rising. They saw the curve of a wave before it arrived. They felt the hesitation before an echoing swell. And so, when they sailed, they didn't need the chart anymore. The map was inside them. There is something quietly powerful about these stick charts. They are simple, but deep. Silent. But filled with voice. They remind us that maps do not needing to be meaningful. They do not need symbols to hold memory. Sometimes, all it takes is wood, string, and a touch of someone who remembers. They remind us, too, that navigation isn't just about where you're going. It's about how it feels to go there. It's about trusting that the sea has patterns and that those patterns can be known. They remind us that even in the middle of the ocean, with no land in sight, we are never truly lost as long as we remember what the ocean feels like beneath our. The quiet power of Pacific wayfinding is not just that it worked, it's how it was remembered. How could one person carry the knowledge of hundreds of stars, of wave patterns across thousands of kilometers of open sea, of birds and clouds, and signs too soft to even describe? How could they set off into a horizon without any visible landmark and arrive at just the right island? It wasn't because they had books. It was because they had memory. Not memory like we often think of it, not a list of facts or a diagram to stare at. This was memory built into the body, folded into songs, pressed into the hand by fingers that had traced the same chart hundreds of times. This was a knowledge passed from human to human, from voice to ear, from touch to skin. Learning navigation was not a class. It was a life. The learning didn't begin on the sea. It started in the home. Children heard ocean chants from the time they were small. Not lessons, but lullabies. Not diagrams, but stories. A grandmother might sing, stars walk the night with slow quiet steps one after another. They mark the breath one rehue arises. Turn your face when otter sets. You've reached the place. Simple, soft, but filled with truth. The rhythms settled into the bones. The names slipped in between chores, between meals, between games. Before a child learned to paddle, they learned to look. Before they memorized directions, they watched the adults do it. Not loudly, but every day. How their father felt the waves with his feet. How their mother pointed out the birds. How their aunt lifted her eyes to the sky and said, "It's not time yet. Wait for the shift." It was learning by absorption. Like watching a fire. First it just warms you. Then you begin to understand the wood, the smoke, the colors. In time, it becomes your own. As they grew older, the learning became more focused. Still, no paper. Still no pens. But now they were invited to touch the stick charts. Each evening, after the sea had calmed, they would sit beside a chart made of wood and shells. The elder would lay it across their lap. Feel this curve. They'd say, "That's the swell that travels straight from Mayuro to Alec." They would run their finger along it. "This line reflects when you near Lickheap. Do you feel the bend?" They would nod dot, then they'd repeat the path, tracing with their finger dot again dot and again. Dozens of nights dot until they didn't need to look anymore. The hand remembered on its own. Some elders covered the child's eyes. "Now feel it again. Tell me where you are." The child would pause, stroke the line. Notice where sticks crossed, where shells rattled softly dot, then they'd say, "Here, this is where the double swell happens, the crossing. The sea grows sharper," and the teacher would nod and smile. When they were ready, they sailed small journeys, not alone but beside their teachers. During the trip, the canoe would rise and fall, and the elder would ask softly, "What do you feel?" The student would close their eyes, then whisper, "The swell beneath is long from the north, but something else rides on top, short waves from the east." And the elder would reply, "Yes, today's from now, that second swell will disappear." "What will you follow then?" "The long one," the student would say. The deep voice. The lesson was not loud dot, it was quiet. Shared breath between travelers. Nothing was rushed. You don't rush the ocean dot, you walk with it. Later, as the student matured, they began to carry the chant of the journey in their own voice. Not like reciting a poem in school, but like humming, something you've known all your life. They would sit before an elder and speak the journey aloud. "In the morning, we rise with Hekupa on our right shoulder. The bird of light guides us past the double echo to days of long swell." Then the whispering flatness, "When the birds circle again, we are near. The water pulls west, we resist it." And then land. The elder would listen. They would not nod until the end. And when they did nod, it was not applause. It was recognition. A door had opened dot, memory had been passed. The story now lived in someone new. Each student learned slightly differently. Some remembered better through chance dot, others through dreams. Some carved small pieces of driftwood, shaping the wave lines with their own knives. Some laid out pebbles on the ground, recreating the crossing as a kind of prayer. There were no tests, but everyone knew when the learning had rooted itself. Because confidence doesn't need to shout, it glows. And when a teacher saw the glow in the student's face, that soft calm of knowing they knew the ocean would be kind to them. Let's pause here, Zakib. Think about what it means to remember this way dot. No screens, no checklists, no copying. Only time dot and trust dot, and the slow folding of knowledge from one generation into the next. The ocean wasn't something you conquered dot, it was something you came to know. And the knowing was gentle dot, held in shells and string dot, in rhythm and repetition dot, in voices that loved you. Maps can be burned, books can be lost, but memory stored in hands and hearts and skin that lasts as long as people breathe. And in the Marshall Islands and across the Pacific, it still breathes. Because someone once said, "Don't write it down dot, pass it on dot, and when they sail, they'll remember." The sea may be a highway, the stars may be the signs, but it is the wind, invisible, soft, or sharp, that fills the sail and carries the canoe forward. Without wind, the vessel waits. With too much, it bends. But with just enough in just the right direction, the canoe glides gently, like a hand across still water. Ancient Polynesian voyagers had no word for weather the way we do today. They didn't divide it into numbers or symbols. They understood it not through apps or maps, but by observing its behavior. They learned how to listen to the wind not just with their ears, but with their faces, their shoulders, their sails, habits, seasons. It came from places with names. It traveled certain roads, sky roads reliable enough to shape a calendar. When it arrived, they welcomed it. When it shifted, they listened. When it paused, they waited. Wind wasn't just power. It was voice. On islands across the Pacific, people had names for the winds. Not general ones, specific names that described where the wind came from when it arrived. The Marquesas, each culture had dozens of wind names. One name might mean the wind that rises before rain. Another could mean the wind that returns at dusk. Others were tied to the time of year or to the direction they blew. A certain soft breeze meant it was time to plant. A sharper one brought fish closer to shore. Some winds were feared. Others were greeted like old friends, and sailors remembered. The navigator stands still, eyes closed, and says, "The Tokelau wind is rising from the northeast. We'll follow it as long as it lasts." That tells them everything. The sail will be angled slightly left. The outrigger sits to windward to balance the boat. The course is gently westward. The journey has begun. Not with a clock, with a breath. Winds are not just surface air. They shape the sea, every wave, every ripple. Every spray line tells you something about wind. When the tops of waves begin to lift and break, called whitecaps, it tells you the wind is fresh and steady. When small waves run fast ahead of the larger swell, the wind has shifted quickly. When the ocean flattens and only deep swells remain, the wind has fallen asleep. Sailors noticed how each wind left its fingerprint on the water. They didn't need to look up, they just watched how the ocean moved. Sometimes the sky gave clues. High, thin clouds moving faster than the ones below. That meant upper-level winds were strong. Heavy clouds stacked on one another. Pressure was building. A line of puffy clouds gathering near sunset. A wind shift might come before morning. Some sailors could smell it. Not in a dramatic way, but in the way you know a familiar room, soft, subtle. Wind that came across the sea smelled of salt. Wind that came off the land smelled green, earthy, warm. It wasn't just about strength. It was about direction. If the wind came from behind, they called it a following wind. From the side, a beam wind. If it came right at the front of the canoe, it was a headwind. In that case, you could not go straight. But wayfinders didn't panic. They adjusted the sail. They tacked across the wind in a zigzag pattern that took longer, but still moved them forward. They worked with the wind, not against it, because they knew the wind does not rush for anyone. But if you are patient, it always returns. And when the wind disappeared, when the sail hung limp and the sea was still, they waited. That might mean a day drifting under the sun, or 2 days of paddling slowly. But they never doubted, because they trusted the rhythm of the sky. They had seen it before. They had stories of journeys that paused for days, only to finish beautifully when the wind whispered again. Sometimes the wind came at night, a cooling breeze after a hot stillness, and the crew would rise quietly, lift the sail, tighten the ropes. And the canoe would move once more. Not fast, but peacefully. Silently. Like the wind had come just for them. For wayfinders, knowing the wind wasn't about predicting storms. It was about moving in harmony with change. Because wind changes, just like life. Sometimes slowly, like a long sigh. Sometimes suddenly, like a sharp breath. You can't hold it, you can't see it, you can only feel it. And when it carries you, you are grateful. That's the lesson of the wind. Don't force the journey. Let it come. And when it does unfold your sail, let the sky guide you. And trust that even the lightest wind knows the way home. The changing winds didn't just tell sailors which way to sail. They told farmers when to plant, fishers when to cast nets, and elders when to call gatherings. Winds were the breath of the year. Each wind had a moment to arrive, a mood it carried, and a song whispered about it. For voyaging cultures, these winds formed a kind of calendar in the air. Let's sit in this part of the story for a while, not just in the movement of sails, but in the meaning behind each breeze. Because in the old world, everything had a season. and the sky knew when to breathe. In parts of the Pacific like Micronesia, Polynesia, and Melanesia, many communities divided the year not into 4 seasons, but to great halves, each one shaped by a different wind pattern. One season brought the steady trade winds, often dry, with calm skies and strong east to west breezes. The other brought changeable winds, sometimes wet, clouded with storms and less predictable. In Tonga, this might be the difference between Taimio'i Hamai, the yam planting season, and Taimio'i Woke, the hurricane season. In Hawaii, Makahiki marked the new year, beginning when the Pleiades star cluster rose in the evening sky round, the time the seasonal winds shifted, bringing rest and feasting. Wayfinders didn't rush against these seasons, they waited. They prepared, and only when the wind's path opened the wind road between islands did they raise their sail and begin the voyage. There is a word for this readiness. It's not urgency, it's not hesitation, it's something softer. It's patience. Polynesian wayfinders were often described not as bold adventurers, but as watchers of the world, people who trusted that the environment, if observed closely enough, always spoke with honesty. The wind was one of those voices. So they learned its timing. They understood when certain winds blew strongest. They knew which ones curled around an island, and which filled the sea like a river flowing in the sky. Some winds only lasted a few days. Others returned like faithful seasons. One wind meant it was safe to cross the channel. Another told them to rest on shore, wrap their mats, and let the ocean sleep. Some winds carried good fishing. Some brought big waves that demanded respect. One wind might bring travelers. Another might carry them home. And so the people made rituals around the wind. Before a long voyage, they didn't just check the sky. They prepared spiritually. Some lit small fires and let the smoke drift. If the smoke curled low and straight, the wind was steady. If it spiraled or trembled, the wind was unsure. Others sang wind chants, soft rhythms that asked the sky to open, to bless the sail, to remember the way. A canoe might not leave for days. It might wait beside the beach, ropes coiled, supplies packed. And then one morning, the navigator would feel it, a new breeze on the cheek, a change in how the palm leaves rustled, a different tilt in the way smoke rose. And that was it. The sign had come. The wind road was open. These wind roads were more than paths in the air. They were corridors of connection between island and island, yes, but also between people. Think of this. Before the wind path opened, a traveler would prepare gifts, not just food, but songs, mats, wooden carvings, or woven baskets, because they weren't just sailing into the wind. They were sailing into relationship. Wind roads brought news. They carried alliances. They carried love letters, food for weddings, chants for funerals, and names for newborns. In this way, the sky itself became the messenger, and the navigator became the bearer of its breath. But the wind, as always, could shift, not wildly, but gently, like a memory changing shape. Wayfinders understood this. They didn't demand the wind stay the same. Instead, they adapted. If a headwind grew stronger, they didn't turn back. They zigzagged, called tacking. Tacking meant sailing across the wind at sharp angles, first to the left, then to the right. It took time, but they reached their goal. Not by overpowering the wind, but by dancing with it. Every change in breeze was met with a shift in sail. Every gust answered with a hand on the steering paddle. Every lull held with calm eyes and quiet breath. They knew that eventually the wind would return. It always does. One old navigator once said, "The sea has no roads, but the wind lays one down." That's what it means to follow the breath of the sky. You do not rush. You do not force. You simply feel. And when the time comes, you raise your sail like a question, and the sky responds. Maybe not with words, but with motion. With rhythm. With direction. And That is enough. Enough to cross thousands of miles. Enough to link distant islands by invisible threads. Enough to turn air into memory and silence into home. In every canoe that crossed the endless Pacific, one person sat still long after the others had turned in for the night, eyes open, feet grounded, body balanced with the sway of the hull. The wayfinder. They weren't the strongest, not always the oldest, but they were the vessel's memory, the voice of the stars, the reader of the waves, and in many ways the quiet soul of the voyage. The role of wayfinder was not chosen lightly. It was earned not with a title, but with years of listening, watching, memorizing, feeling. There was no diploma, no crown. Their knowledge wasn't written down, it was stored in rhythm, in breath, in their bones. They didn't shout orders or stand tall at the front. Most times they sat low and quiet, eyes closed, fingers resting gently on the deck, feeling everything. A twitch in the sail, a clue. A cloud forming low over the horizon, a direction. A bird that circles 3 times, then veers sharply left, a signal. Every moment, every whisper of the sea mattered. And the crew trusted them completely. Not just because of what they knew, but how they knew it. Wayfinders didn't command with fear. They led with calm. They knew the names of stars, sure, but more than that, they knew how to wait. They could sail through days of silence, through nights with no moon, through storms and flat water alike, because they didn't just believe in their skills. They believed in the teachings of those before them. They were never alone. Every star was a teacher, every swell, an old friend. Every journey, a reunion with voices remembered. It's said that when a wayfinder stands in a canoe, they carry their ancestors on their shoulders, not as a burden but as strength. They hear their grandmothers chant when the waves speak softly. They remember the call of their uncle when the birds rise. They feel the tap of their teacher's fingers in the rise and fall of the deck. All those voices blend into one. Trust the ocean. Trust yourself. But even with all their skill, wayfinders didn't pretend to control the sea. They worked with it. Sometimes that meant changing course or waiting a day, or finding quiet in the uncertainty. Because the mark of a true wayfinder wasn't perfection. It was humility. To know that the stars didn't belong to you, that the wind didn't owe you a path, that the ocean, vast and deep, could not be rushed. So they let the journey unfold. And when land finally appeared, just a faint green rise on the edge of blue, they didn't cheer the loudest. They smiled. They bowed their head, and they whispered thank you, not to the sky. Not to the sea, but to the wisdom inside them and all those who gave it. Long before scrolls or stone carvings, before written records or lines etched into plum bark, there were stories. And for the ocean voyagers of the Pacific, many of those stories were written not on earth, but in the sky. The stars above were more than guides. They were archives. They carried the memory of ancestors, journeys, love, loss, courage, and creation. Just as a map tells us how to reach a place, these stories told people who they were, and wherever they sailed, they took their history with them, folded into constellations and night chants that floated softly on the sea breeze. Each island group saw the sky a little differently. Some arranged the stars into animals, a turtle, a shark, a bird flying low. Others saw canoes, warriors weaving sticks or blooming flowers. But no matter the shapes, each constellation came with a tale. These tales weren't bedtime stories. They were spoken truths, sometimes whispered to children under the stars, sometimes chanted at ceremonies, sometimes passed only to those chosen to remember. One constellation might tell of an ancestral canoe that first crossed the ocean, the stars marking its path. Another might hold the memory of a great chief turned into a star so that his people would never be without his protection. Some stories were warnings of rivalries between islands, of storms that taught hard lessons, of migrations made after famine or fire. All of them moved across the sea just as the people did as canoes found new islands. The stars remained the same, but the stories expanded. New journeys were added, new ancestors honored, new songs born. And in every story, something precious was held, identity. A child might look up and hear, that star, that's where our lineage begins. They would repeat it quietly, again and again. Later, as they grew and voyaged, they'd look up from the canoe at that same star and feel not alone but accompanied. Stories in the stars helped with teaching, too. Each tale wrapped in a constellation carried knowledge. How to find north, when to expect rain, which stars ruled each season. A navigator learning the sky was also learning songs, myths, and family trees. Because history wasn't separated from nature. It was nature. It moved with the stars, swam in the sea, flew with the birds, and rode on the wind. When sailors traveled, they sometimes told their hosts these stories and listened to others in return. If two islanders from distant places looked up and saw the same star, each might know it by a different name, they would smile, they would share their version, and history grew broader. Today, many of those star stories remain passed from elder to grandchild. From canoe to classroom, from voice to voice, they remind us that history isn't always written down. Sometimes it's spoken upward, and on a quiet night, far from shore, a navigator might look into the darkness and find not just direction but remembrance. A reminder of who came before, and who they are becoming. One star at a time. It's a green line, then a smudge of dark against brighter blue. Then nothing. Only the slow breathing of the sea. Only the sky, wide and cloudless. Only the creak of the canoe and the rustle of the sail pulling gently against the wind. The journey has truly begun. For the next several days, maybe weeks, there will be nothing but water, no land in sight. No birds, no trees or smoke trails, no shadows on the horizon. Just space, blue above, blue below. To a wayfinder, this is the heart of the voyage. Not a gap, not a void, but a sacred stretch. This part of the journey was known among Pacific navigators by different names. Some called it the Vokalolo or the long haul. Others spoke of it simply as the crossing. It was more than distance. It was a test of rhythm, of patience, of faith in things you couldn't see. Because when you leave one island behind and no new one has yet appeared, the canoe becomes a world. Now the sky has turned violet, then deep blue, then black, and the stars, hundreds of them, flicker out one by one. The ocean does not speak loudly. It whispers in slow, full breaths. The canoe rises gently with the swell, then settles, rises. Cradle, rocked by a parent you cannot see, the navigator sits quietly. They are not guessing, they are remembering. The stars above are no longer distant lights, they are names, directions. Steps in a song they've sung for years. They whisper, this is the way. Keep steady. We are with you, and a crew, even. Have a sleep, trusts. Because trust is not a decision. It is a practice. The canoe is all you have, and that means you begin to notice things differently. The grain of the wood beneath your feet. The hiss of rope tightening when the sail shifts. The way water glimmers against the outrigger. The feel of sunlight warming your skin 1 inch at a time. And always the waves, some slow, some angled, some new. The wayfinder lies flat on the planks, eyes closed, feeling their toes grip lightly. Their hips shift with the rise. They mumble a line of stars under their breath, Aldebaran, then Antares, then Sirius. One star falls, another rises. They are not worried because worry does not steer. Attention does, and they give theirs completely. Time changes at sea. There are no clocks, no appointments, no day marked by traffic or noise. Time becomes the sound of waves passing the hull, the shift of the sun overhead, The songs hummed while scrubbing clothes. Stories ease the silence. But sometimes, silence is all you need. The ocean doesn't always ask for words. Sometimes, it just asks you to sit. Some mornings are hard. You wake up and nothing has changed. No birds, no clouds. The navigator stands, lifts their hand to the sun and names the direction. The crew nods. They adjust the sail. They begin to hum again. Slowly, the canoe moves forward. Because forward is not about speed. It's about steadiness. A canoe that drifts is not lost if the navigator is awake, and on this canoe, they always are. Food is simple. Bundles of dried fish, wrapped taro and breadfruit. Coconuts, still green and full of juice. Nothing goes to waste. Every gourd is refilled with rainwater when showers pass overhead. Every cooking fire is small. No smoke is wasted. Sometimes the crew dips nets into the water. A flying fish leaps and lands on the deck. That's a small celebration, a sign that the ocean sees them, that it gives. But even when it doesn't, they do not complain, because hunger passes, but gratitude stays. There is peace. The navigator smiles, because this is the middle of the crossing. You are now in the middle of the open sea, truly in it. Days have passed. Nights, too. No sail from a distant canoe. No signal fire on the edge of the sea. The sky still carries stars, and the ocean still rocks the canoe like breath, but the world has shrunk now into a floating frame of wood, sail, and memory. This is not loneliness. It's presence. Here, the canoe is the island. Time stretches differently out here. You wait before the sun and check the ropes, the sail, the sky. The clouds are kind today, moving slow, cotton white. The swell hasn't shifted much. The steering paddle dips, rises. The wind hasn't turned. The navigator stands again, still says we're on course, but something inside. You aches to see land. To feel the sand again underfoot. To hear trees rustle instead of cloth. The navigator senses it. Without a word, they gather the crew near the mast at night and sing. Their voice isn't grand. It's worn in the way driftwood is beautiful, shaped by time, smoothed by elements, quiet. They sing of a canoe named Kaumoaliai, who crossed, alone and listened only to stars. They sing of the bird who flew in circles for days and still found home. They sing of the island that hides behind the horizon, but not for long, and the aching eases. You sleep that night, not with impatience but with trust. Food has lasted so far. The taro was packed well, wrapped in breadfruit leaves. Coconut water still tastes sweet. Dried fish catches sunlight when passed between hands. But now, each meal is smaller. The navigator nods quietly at this. It's normal. The ocean teaches conservation without speaking. You eat what you need. Nothing more. You scrape every bowl clean. You rinse your hands with salt water. You thank every fish that leaps on board. One young crewmate begins offering half their meal to another. No one asked them to, but in the stillness, kindness grows. Even hunger is gentler when shared. Rain comes one day, a soft rain, not a storm. Every pot, bowl, and gourd is set out. Nobody talks loudly. They let the drops fall. Some rinse their hair. Some laugh. One man stands perfectly still and lets it run down his arms. It feels like a gift. Because when you've crossed this far without land, even the sky giving water feels like a harbor. Each evening, the stars return. You know their names now. They're familiar. Not just as dots of light, but as steps in a journey. That one, the navigator says, leads toward the island you left. That one leads you home. Another points to a reef beyond reach. Another's only seen this time of year. They've begun to feel less like stars and more like faces. Watching, whispering, especially when the wind shifts, especially when the ocean sounds different, like it's about to say something you've never heard before. One dawn, the canoe feels lighter, not faster, but freer. The wind has freshened, not fierce, just consistent. The sail billows like it remembers something. The sea's surface is smoother with a rippled skin that stretches with confidence. The navigator calls softly, "Birds today," before sundown, and then they sit back, down. They don't need to explain how they know. You trust them, and just before dusk, two specks appear in the sky, small, swift, circling once, then darting west. No cries, no patterns, just presence. Birds. You haven't seen birds in days. They aren't flying toward fish. They're flying in a straight line, and the entire canoe holds its breath. No cheers, no shouts, just stillness, because hope doesn't always arrive loud. Sometimes it glides in quietly on wings. The next day, more birds, not many, but enough. Different ones, chew shorter tails, lower flights. These don't live far out at sea. They sleep on land, which means land isn't imagined. It's close, later, a changing clouds. They stack higher, hold shape longer. You've seen this before when you approach the last island. Someone tastes the air. Green, they say. It smells green, and it does, like leaves, like wet bark, like wind that passed through trees before touching your skin. Still, the horizon remains empty. No peaks, no rise. Just more ocean. The navigator sleeps little that night. They sit upright, eyes open, knees tucked to their chest. They count stars, but also swells. 3 long ones from the east, 1 sharper one from the west. Not normal, the sharp ones. A reflection. An echo. An answer. They call to the crew quietly. We'll reach it tomorrow. It's there, just beyond. The outrigger creaks. The sail shifts once. The canoe stays the course. But now, every inch forward feels different. Every breeze holds promise. Every eye searches the edge of the world. At first, no one sees it. You rise with a wave, glance, see only haze. You rise again, and this time something dark lingers. A line? No. A shape. No, still unsure. Then someone gasps, not loud but deep. The navigator walks forward, points, and says one word, land. No extra words. Just that. And suddenly the silence breaks. Laughter, weeping, not chaotic, just full. Someone kneels, someone sings. Even the canoe seems to hum, because the ocean has given. It held its silence. It demanded patience. And now it reveals its secret. The island rises slowly, not like a movie, like a memory surfacing. First shadows, then green. Then outline, then the shimmer of white beach catching early sun. You steer toward it, not fast, still slow, because arrival, like departure, is sacred. It must be felt all the way. As the canoe nears the shallows, everyone touches the wood, not out of habit, out of thanks, because this canoe, this living path, carried not just bodies. It carried memory. Trust. Dreams. And here, on the other side of endless blue, those dreams have touched ground. You step out. The water is warm. Your feet sink into sand. You look back once at the wide sea behind you, and what once seemed infinite now feels familiar, like a relative you didn't know you missed until you'd been held in its arms. The canoe is still. The sky stretches, and the wind, carrying the scent of trees, nudges your shoulder like a friend saying, you did it. You crossed the void. You carried history. And now, like every voyager before you, you begin again. You've crossed the empty sea. The canoe drifts into the shallows now, slow and steady. Its sail loosened, its crew quiet. Ahead is land not imagined, not hoped for, but real. It rises like a long-forgotten word, spoken aloud after years of Silence. Green hills, grey cliffs, a thin curve of pale sand hugging still water, the calls of distant birds, the hush of wind blowing through unfamiliar leaves. After days or weeks of only sky and sea, the land feels overwhelming. Some weep, not because they were afraid, but because arrival is a kind of remembering. You never truly doubted, but still you are in awe that the stars and waves held their promise. The canoe doesn't crash onto the shore, glides gently. The crew paddles softly now. The water shallows. Sand brushes the hull. The outrigger sighs. The sail is lowered. Silence deepens. You've arrived, but you stay still, because in this moment, you're not explorers. You're guests. No one leaps into the water. No one rushes forward. The canoe is still sacred, and so is the land. The navigator stands. They raise one hand, not high, just enough, a gesture. An acknowledgement. Island, they whisper. We greet you. This is not superstition. It's relationship. The first to step off the canoe is not always the strongest or highest ranking. It may be the quietest. The one who speaks to wind, the one who listens to birds. They step forward barefoot. Their feet touch the wet sand. They kneel. They place a hand on the earth, and they pause. Because this land is not empty, even if no people appear, even if the beach is still. This land holds memory. It has heard waves long before your canoe arrived. It has felt the sun before your ancestors carved their first hull. It remembers. So you listen, and you wait. When the crew steps ashore, it is in soft order. They carry gifts, bananas, topper cloth, wooden bowls, carved combs, and fragrant bundles of leaves. If people live here, these are peace offerings. If it is uninhabited, the gifts are placed in a sacred spot offered to the island itself. Some islands hold shrines already marked by stones, shells, or ancestral trees. If not, a temporary shelter is built not to claim the land, but to ask permission to stay. Even when new land was needed after a storm, after famine, after decision, arrival was not taken lightly. Land was sacred. To arrive well was to begin with humility. Exploration began the next morning. No rush. A small group walked inland. Slowly. Hands open, eyes wide. They looked for water first. Then fruit, trees, signs of trails, structures, birds, smoke. Sometimes they found others, sometimes they didn't. If others were there, it was not battle that followed, it was protocol. There were words to be said, names to be given, genealogies to be shared. If lines matched, they were kin. If not, gifts were exchanged to prove peace. Voices stayed low. Eyes stayed kind. Names were spoken softly, because on a new island, first words matter. The canoe stayed on the beach, unmoved, and empty. It was both home and reminder. Even as crew members stepped onto the new soil, some slept aboard the first nights. Not out of fear, but out of respect. 1 foot on land. 1 foot on ocean. Balance. The hull was not just a shell of wood. It had carried their trust across the sea, and it stayed until they were certain the land accepted them. Sometimes an island was left again. Not rejected, but released. It might be beautiful, but to dry. To rocky. No fresh water. To distant from other kin. In those cases, the canoe was readied once more. Nothing wasted. Departure was quiet. The gifts left behind stayed. Offerings of gratitude for shelter, for rest, for reminding the crew what mattered. Not every landfall meant a home, but every landfall meant learning, and every leaving was still a kind of blessing. But when the island felt right, when the water was sweet, when the land was kind, when the trees whispered yes, then the canoe was finally pulled ashore. Not dragged. Welcomed. It rested on woven mats. Flowers were laid upon it. Some kissed it. The ocean has released you. It no longer feels like a stranger. Its sounds are familiar. Birds nesting in thick branches, breezes, lifting leaves like breath, water trickling from somewhere deep inland. The first nervous hours after landfall have faded. What remains is a sense of belonging slowly growing. The people gather beneath a tree not far from shore. Shade covers their heads. Roots press against their bare feet. The navigator speaks first not with authority, but gratitude. They speak not only of distance crossed, but of patience endured. They name the stars that guided them. They name the crew. They look around, as if asking the island itself, "Will you accept us?" And then they kneel. So do the others. This is the beginning not of conquest, but of planting. Not plants yet, but memory. They do not cut down trees right away. They walk among them. They place ponds on their bark. They smell their sap. They taste fallen fruit and let it rest on the tongue. They listen, because every island has a rhythm, and to build a home, you must first match its music. Some walk inland and return with stories. Clear water up the hill, soft soil to the west, wild pigs near the forest's edge, banana trees, taro, strange birds. Others stay near shore, mending fishing nets, cooking the last of the voyage's dried food. Children explore tidal pools. The oldest crew members rest. The canoe is still watched, still visited, like an elder who deserves quiet company even after the journey is over. The first night spent fully on land is quiet. Some still sleep on the canoe, unsure if the ground will welcome their dreams, but others stretch mats under the trees, listening to the insects. The creak of branches. It takes getting used to. After so long afloat. The earth feels still in a strange way. To solid. To firm, but comforting. A reminder that the journey had a destination, that the horizon doesn't stretch on forever. That one day you stop. And stay. Soon the canoe's supplies are brought ashore. Baskets of seed, bundles of sugarcane, calabashes filled with fermented drink. The gifts once wrapped in topper cloth for offerings still unused now become part of the settlement. Tools carved from bone. Hooks. Woven mats, carved bowls. Not many. Enough to begin. These are handled with care. They represent intention. This place is no longer a stop. It is becoming a life. The navigator helps choose the site for the first shelter. They don't point to the highest spot or the shadiest. They point to the land where the swell's echo feels steady, where the stars rise clearly above trees, where the ground seems to listen. They place a foot there and say, "Here." The shelter is built slowly, posts placed gently, rope tied patiently, palm fronds layered as if tucking the land into sleep. No hammering. No rush. Just rhythm. Names begin to emerge. That rock, shaped like a crouching bird, becomes stone of arrival. That stream, curved like a turtle shell, becomes water of first drink. That hill, where the sun rises over the shoulder of two trees, becomes defined a ridge. Names hold story. They settle the island in the hearts of the people, even before structures rise. The memory of this place begins to root. Soon. A fire is lit. Not the first fire, but the first for living, not for cooking dried taro, but for roasting fish just pulled from the reef. The smell carries. It smells like beginning. Someone calls out. A chant. Others join. They do not clap. They let their voices carry softly, curling around trees, echoing into space. Birds go quiet. The air listens, and the land hears its first lullaby. Later, a child picks a red flower from the trees. She places it behind her ear. She giggles, then runs down the sand. The navigator watches. Smiles. That flower, that joy, is the real start. That laughter cannot come from guests. It comes from people who are beginning to feel rooted. To feel at home. The old canoe is not torn apart. Not immediately. that would be to sudden. To final, some parts are reused. The ropes that held the mast now hold up a thatched roof. A plank is placed at the entrance of the home. A threshold walked over with respect. Other pieces are left intact. Someday, they'll form part of the platform for a meeting house or a memorial. But for now, they rest under shade. Aging slowly, loved because the canoe was not just transport, it was a companion. You don't forget those who carried you, even when they lie quiet. Days pass, then weeks, and the new rhythms begin to deepen. The garden planted near the stream. A path cleared from forest to shore. Shells strung and hung above the sleeping place, not decoration, but memory of sea music. Stones set in a ring for the cooking hearth. At night, the stars return again. They rise in the same pattern they always have, but now they look slightly different. They rise behind a new hill. They pass over a new sky, so new names begin to be whispered for them. Old names still respected, but some shift, because this sky is also home now. And home speaks its own language. The stories begin to already. A child is born 2 weeks after arrival. Their name means land faced first. Another story is told of the owl that flew silently over camp that first night Howard watched and didn't blink. Some say it was an ancestor. Some say it blessed the land. Others say nothing but light a small bowl of incense when they speak about the owl. Memory begins quietly, but grows fast, like vines wrapping around everything, slowly making it part of you. One morning, one of the crew members walks back to the canoe alone. They sit on the hull. Run their hand along it. Then rise. And with a quiet gesture, take a small carved figure from their pouch. They place it at the bow. A guardian, not for the voyage ahead, but for what has been. They touch the wood once more and whisper, "Thank you." Then they walk back to the village, now truly planted, not just by seeds. But by presence. By trust. By time, and by the stories that will now rise from this soil for generations. When the last post of the shelter was tied, when the canoe finally rested beneath the shade of a breadfruit tree, something subtle began to shift. The voyagers were no longer voyaging. They had arrived, and slowly, carefully, they began shaping the island, not just with hands, but with memory. Not in haste, but in rhythm. A garden, a fire pit, a sleeping space arranged around the rise of the eastern stars. These weren't structures. They were stories planted in earth. A village grew not grand, not loud. It grew in the way vines wrap around old stones, gently, patiently. Every hut faced the ocean just a little, as if remembering. A meeting house was built from knowledge rather than blueprints. When people gathered there, the waves outside continued their lullaby as if the sea itself listened in. Children were born, their names whispered of stars, of winds, of birds seen far out at sea. No voyage was forgotten. Instead, it echoed through everyday life, not as pride, as presence. The community was shaped not by walls but by shared memory. Some years later, a child asked their grandmother, "Where do we come from?" The grandmother pointed not to a book or a map, but to the sky. "That star carried us," she said softly, "and that one lit the way when we were afraid." The child stared for a long time, silent. The next night, they asked again. And so began the passing of wayfinding, not as a ceremony, but as a lullaby. There were no classrooms. The ocean taught everything. Children learned by walking barefoot on paths their elders had once sailed across open sea. They sang chants shaped by swells. They mimicked steering paddles with sticks. They stood still when birds flew overhead, naming their direction before they vanished behind trees. Knowledge wasn't given, it was lived, and when the time came, a canoe was carved not because it was needed, but because memory deserved movement. The sea wasn't feared. It was home waiting to be visited again. Generations passed. Some stayed, some sailed again. Some were called by distant clouds blooming on the far horizon. But something had changed now. They weren't seeking survival, they were continuing relationship. Each voyage was a thread between islands pulling families closer, not farther. The navigators who returned were greeted not as heroes, but as storytellers. They spoke of reefs shaped like spears and dolphins that followed them for days, of rain that sang on the sail, and stars that disappeared, only to return at dawn with clearer voices. And every time they came home, the island greeted them with gifts not of gold but of questions. What did you see? What did the ocean say this time? How far does memory stretch eventually? Some canoes aged beyond use. Their hulls lay beneath flowering vines, but no one dared burn them. They were honored touched on feast days, cleaned by children, sung to softly in the evening breeze. The people knew the voyage didn't end when the canoe stopped floating. It continued in how they walked the land, in how they folded leaves, in how they tilted their heads to listen for changing wind. And as the old ones aged, they passed one final gift. Not tools, not maps, but stillness. Stand quietly, one elder said. Face the sea, and when the wind touches your face, that's us. This was never just a story of crossing an ocean. It was the story of becoming ocean, becoming rhythm, becoming memory, becoming part of a world where land and sea, past and future, silence and song all belong. So when you next hear wind, or see stars, or close your eyes beside moving water, know this, somewhere inside you, the canoe still waits, and the sea is still calling, and a journey is never truly over.